I'd like to start by asking you to help me out with something. Who's your neighbor to this church? How do you think about this community in which you're situated? Who are your neighbors? What are they like? That wasn't a rhetorical question. I want people to actually call out some things you think about when you think about this neighborhood. Okay, what are they like? Do you know any of them? Okay. So hard to pinpoint like one demographic. It's kind of diverse. Okay. What else?
We're right behind major government buildings. So whoever inhabits them would be our neighbor.
Okay. Yes. So a lot of government, right? Yeah.
And the library of Congress.
So a lot of librarians and archivists and the people who use them, right? Okay. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Those that are marginalized in society that live in our community.
There's a lot of marginalized people who live right in this community as well. Okay? Anything else interesting? So, you got like an Arkansan who drove all the way from Arkansas, doesn't know DC that well. What would surprise me about this neighborhood that I don't know? Anything? A spread in power dynamic. Between who? Okay. Who live on the same block. So, yeah, okay.
Although some of them live in houses and some of them don't.
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay, good. So that gives us just a little bit of a picture. So I'll tell you a couple of experiences I had this last week, or even yesterday, that paint a picture for me a little bit more of this neighborhood, and maybe they'll draw your attention to your own neighborhood in some new ways. The first one is I've gone on a run every day that I've been in DC, and interestingly, there hasn't been a single day when I've gone on a run when I haven't seen somebody walking around with a Live Generously t-shirt on. Have you seen those t-shirts or know about them? Okay, so you should know about these shirts. It may have a lot to do with how many people in this congregation are active with Thrivent, which is a financial organization started by Lutherans, formerly Lutheran Brotherhood and AAL, and then they merged to be Thrivent. And Thrivent they're a charitable organization. They give away millions of dollars a year. And one of the ways they give it away is they do these action teams. So if you're a Thrivent member, and anybody can be a Thrivent member, you can pay like a little fee if you don't want to actually have a product of Thrivent. You can just pay to be a member. And then you can apply for an action team grant, and you can get like a $250 card to do your project. So lots of people all over the country do these projects. And then when you do the project, you can tell Thrivent how many t-shirts you want for your group, and they'll give you as many t-shirts as you want. The last time I did one, I asked for 100 shirts, and so they mailed me 100 shirts. Lots of people have done this, and as a result, there are people walking around all over Washington, D.C. wearing Live Generously t-shirts. Have you seen these shirts, maybe? It just says on the front, Live Generously. So every time I've seen one of those, I've run up to the people who are wearing them, and I'm like, are you Lutheran? And they look at me and they're like, what are you trying to sell me? And then I just find out where they're from and if they're Lutheran. And most of the time they've been Lutheran. In one instance, the t-shirt was given away by one young woman to another young woman, so they had no idea what Lutherans were. She'd just gotten the t-shirt from a friend. But it's interesting to me that besides the presence of the Lutheran churches here, as you go around town, perhaps the most visible Lutheran thing in Washington, D.C. are those t-shirts. They're literally all over. Like, it's like that's as close as we come to doing Nike as Lutherans, right? So I thought that was interesting that Lutheran ministry is peppering the neighborhood or the city more than we might realize. The other one, this is really intriguing to me, but yesterday, how many of you have gone over and looked at every one of those statues across the street on the Folgers Museum? Raise your hand if you haven't. Okay, so I hadn't either, and we're staying right in the parsonage, right? So it's like literally right across the street. So yesterday, my 6-year-old son wanted to play Frisbee, and that grassy area is very inviting for Frisbee. So we went over there to start playing Frisbee, and suddenly he's looking at those statues, and he's like, why does that guy have a donkey's head instead of a regular head? So for the next half an hour, my 6-year-old sat down in front of each one of those statues, and I told him the Shakespeare story, because there's like 8 of them along here. I think there might be ones on the other side of the building too, so we could do that another day. But it's fascinating to me, and this is part of what it's like to live in a neighborhood as rich as yours is, and I don't just mean rich in terms of like monetary wealth, although there's clearly a lot of monetary wealth here, but it's rich in terms of symbolism and all kinds of things that you can see, right? That there can be so much wealth, so much richness, that you can't even notice it all, right? So I'd been staying here for over a week, and I hadn't even noticed or seen these. You go over, and there's these 8 amazing carvings of Shakespeare plays, and they're so rich in detail that each one of them tells you, if you know the story. I had to wrestle a little bit with the first half of Henry IV. I couldn't remember that one very well, but all the other ones I knew pretty well the story and could tell them to my son. I probably got parts wrong. He's going to grow up and like study Shakespeare in college and be like, Dad, you told me that, Titania married the donkey-headed man, and actually, but I don't know, anyway, so they're all right over there, right? So this is what we're dealing with in terms of Christian ministry in any neighborhood. Almost every neighborhood, even very rural ones that don't have as many people, still have so much there that we can overlook. We just kind of can drive in, do our thing, leave, and you don't even notice, even though you've sat here for decades, maybe some of you, and you've never looked at, I can see one of them through that window, right? And you never looked. That's interesting. And we all do this, right? It's kind of part of the way our brains work. You have to shut out, like if your brain actually tried to take in everything that was around you all of the time, you would be overwhelmed. And so there's a reason why we filter out some stuff. But nevertheless, part of being a Christian, part of what Jesus calls people to do is to wake up to what's immediately right there. So he tells this little teaching. It's a very short one and very interesting, right? And ends it with the one that's the most like, wake up and do the simple thing. So the famous one, because it's the most easy to understand, is he says, whoever gives a cup of cold water to the one of the least of these in my name will receive their reward. It's pretty simple, right? And most of us assume it's a good thing to give cold water to somebody who's thirsty. We all kind of assume that's the right thing to do, right? The complication comes in what we think about the different kinds of people who might approach us seeking cold water. So one of these that you're talking about, the uneducated ones who are living on the street, they're coming down the street, maybe they're stumbling. Maybe they haven't washed because they don't have access to water. And then you think one thing about whether you'll give them a cup of cold water. And then you have another one, and this happened to me yesterday too. We got out of our parsonage, we walked down the street, we were on our way to Eastern Market, and just 4 houses down, there's this big group of people all out of celebrating the sesquicentennial for Canada. So there's like a group of Canadians. They're sitting in their front lawn. They've got a big thing of cupcakes, and they got a sign up that says, "Free beer, come drink with us," for Canada Day, right? Well, what I thought immediately was, that's so interesting, because how class constrained is that? Like, what limit would they place on who could come in and drink beer with them? Do they give out free beer every day? You know, are they more comfortable with me drinking beer with them, which I didn't do because I don't drink beer, and we were on our way to the Eastern Market, but I did stop in and grab a cupcake. You know, it's like I started thinking about that kind of map. So then that backs up into the other teachings, which are more conceptual, but super important. So Jesus also teaches, in addition to what we think is the simple one, give a cup of cold water and receive a reward, says, whoever receives a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive the reward of a prophet, and whoever receives a righteous person in the name of a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. These are more tricky because, by and large, if you pay attention to who the biblical prophets were and who the righteous ones in Israel were, these were not the kind of people that if you received them, your neighbors would be happy about it. So, you know, an example would be, what would happen if you sent a note to your neighbors right along here who are selling their buildings? The one I saw just down around the corner is selling for $1.2 million, right? Maybe that's about normal. Is that about normal for a row house around here? Is that low or high? Which is it, low or high? What? That's low? How much are these valued? 1.5-ish? Okay, so you got people who are owning $1.5 million properties right next to the church, and you send a note out and you say, we're going to start using the basement of the church to house the homeless people that are on your street. What kind of reaction will you get? I know what kind of reaction you'll get from some people, right? That's a righteous thing to do. To open your church for shelter for the homeless is a righteous thing to do. And receiving a righteous person in the name of a righteous person will give you a righteous reward, but it won't necessarily put you in good with your neighbors, right? And this is where this gets complicated. Or we know what the prophets said, right? The prophets tended to say really challenging things to the nation of Israel, like, because you're doing this, your country's going to fall apart. And so receiving a prophet in the name of a prophet isn't necessarily that popular of a thing to do. And so Jesus offers this whole set of teachings to kind of erase this like basic awareness. So then this gets you back to the neighbor question I asked you at the beginning. And I think it's just one that's really worth kind of sitting with for a while. Have you paid attention with wide open eyes to your actual neighborhood? Have you seen it? Do you know it? What do you need to do to know it and see it better? What parts have you overlooked intentionally? What parts don't you even notice because you don't have even the right equipment to notice those things? I mean, these are all questions that all of us should be asking in every one of our neighborhoods all of the time, at least some of the time, right? What are we not noticing? What are we not seeing? What have we closed out? Those are very interesting questions. And then the challenge that Jesus offers is, do you have the moral courage and fortitude to welcome each one of those things, regardless of the cost? Do you have the moral courage to receive a righteous person in the name of a righteous person? Do you have the moral courage to welcome a prophet in the name of a prophet? Do you have the moral courage to even do the most basic thing that Jesus says? Offer a cup of cold water, right? And I'm not saying these things because I know. I'm a stranger enough to you that I don't know all the things that you do or don't do as a congregation. So I'm simply raising them as these are the things that Jesus lifts up and offers and presents. And there's this map, there's this, I don't know if you want to call it kind of like a soteriological perspective that Jesus has in Matthew, which rubs up against popular Lutheran piety. He keeps talking about rewards, like what you get for doing good works, right? And this bugs us because we've all been taught, if we've been around Lutherans at all, right, that you're saved by faith alone and not by the works of the law. And so this is like kind of weird to hear Jesus say, like, if you do this, you will receive this. If you do this, you will get this. And yet we can't get around it. He keeps saying it over and over again so much in the Gospel of Matthew. There must be something to it. There must actually be truth to the idea that if you do the right thing, you'll get a reward. Right? And maybe the way to think about that is to say it's not about eternal salvation. It's literally right now. If you welcome a prophet in the name of a prophet, you will get the prophet's reward. Guilt by association is what you'll get. You start welcoming prophets, people will start to think you might be a prophet. You start welcoming righteous people, people might think that you're among the righteous. You start giving out cold water, more people will show up because they'll be like, hey, they're giving out cold water. Right? I mean, it's literally like that. And this is the way this works. Your community will notice you because you notice them. So if you want to be a good neighbor right around here, it will start with noticing that there's really cool statues of Shakespeare plays right across the street. And then the more you notice in the community and do something about it, the more your neighbors will wake up and say, hey, they have cold water.